What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Okay, so today I wanted to talk to you guys about something that happened when I was talking to Craig Oliver, who has a wonderful Medium account called Escape Velocity. The initial plan, though, because it was so last minute, we didn't have a structure really. And I wanted to read something that he translated on his Medium account, which was essentially one of the reasons I wanted to talk to him in the first place. But we didn't get to read it because, as I told you, the conversation did go to little sensitive places, but it's conversations that we need to have. So if you want to check out the conversation we had, I'm going to leave it in the description. This talks about an Italian newspaper called Lespresso and an article that they released that talks about President Donald Trump and talks about this Project Preserve Destiny is called. And where Craig and I focused was in the abduction stuff and the links that it may or may not have with many of the main players in the world stage. But one of the main things that was also talked about in that article was that potentially Trump is trying to get control of the SAPs and USAPs, unacknowledged. This points toward possibly President Donald Trump already being well aware of what's going on if he wants to gain control of those programs. The issue that I had at first was that this publication, I tried to gauge its authenticity. And to my surprise, this publication is slightly left leaning and well, they talk about against all of the principles that generally would represent President Trump. And they're talking about this topic in a very serious fashion. So to me, that was significant because they don't criticize Trump in any way, even though they think differently than him. And they do talk about this program. And I am going to read to you guys from directly from the Escape Velocity Medium account from Craig Oliver. I'm going to read you the article. The title is Not Only Tariffs for Trump. In Washington, the new mystery is called Project Preserve Destiny. And then it goes like this. The dossier provides for 6 levels of secrecy. The tycoon, meaning Trump, would be intrigued by the possibility of using the UFO theme to show himself as a president telling the truth to the Americans. And then the article starts like this. That was the subtitle. There are not only tariffs on Donald Trump's new agenda. Behind the scenes in Washington, a much darker dossier is moving, the one on UFOs. And according to confidential sources, something very concrete would already be moving. It's called Project Preserve Destiny, and it's much more than just a program of study of the so-called UAP unidentified anomalous phenomena. Behind this name, evocative and disturbing, lies a round of institutional waltzes that risks redrawing the balance between the Pentagon and the White House. According to rumors, the so-called Special Access Programs, SAP, which until now formerly depended on the Department of Defense, will no longer pass from the Pentagon. They will respond directly to the Oval Office, a decision that, they say, was not taken lightly. On the contrary, it is the result of weeks of very confidential meetings, briefings behind closed doors, and tensions between the military leaders and some counselors closest to the Republican president. Because the Project Preserve Destiny would not be any dossier. It provides 6 levels of secrecy, say the same sources that would make any conspiracy thrillers pale. They range from the public level, where the fairy tales tell you, as those who know the dossier sarcastically explain, to the so-called programs in the programs, sections so compartmentalized that remain inaccessible even to the incumbent president. Behind the choice to move the center of gravity to the White House, there would be, according to the well-informed, the will to directly control the flow of information. And perhaps, in perspective, also to decide what to make public and what not, a decision that in part also responds to the pressure of an increasingly attentive public opinion. The recent reports of Congress have raised more doubts than uncertainties, fueling the idea that something is systematically hidden. But in the corridors of Washington, there are those who read this move as a more political key, a card to be played in the next election campaign. Trump himself, they say, would be intrigued by the possibility of using the UFO theme to show himself as a president who finally tells the truth to the Americans. It would not be the first time that a president has stroked the temptation of an epochal revelation. But this time, the experts warn the scope of the documents at stake would be unprecedented. The Pentagon officially does not comment, but the rumors speak of nervousness at the top. Transferring the management program so sensitive to the White House also means exposing them to greater risks of leaking news. And the line between transparency and propaganda becomes very subtle. Meanwhile, in the palaces of power, there are confidential meetings and only eyes briefings, update sheets so classified that to consult them, you need not only authorization, but also the physical presence in a shielded office, a skiff that is. Because they explain Project Preserve Destiny is not just about unidentified flying objects, but potentially revolutionary technologies and perhaps not all of them of terrestrial origin. Science fiction, maybe, but in Washington, reality and legend often get confused. And I thought it was very important to read this to you because of the stuff that's happening right now. And that's why Craig also wanted to talk about all of the other stuff we discussed in that conversation. But reading this article was very important. And I do apologize for not doing it sooner when that came out with Craig. But this, in this context, that potentially the president is trying to get access to these SAPs, if that is true, I think that someone who's trying to help in that could be Representative Eric Burlison, because out of everybody from the UAP caucus, both him and Luna are the most active. I don't feel Luna as committed to this cause as Burleson. Burleson has gone to Mexico. He's been talking about this stuff. He's listening to all parties involved in the UFO community, which I think is important because that's the best way for him to gauge who could be bullshitting him and who isn't. And I do think that his approach is it feels true. It feels like he wants to know what's going on, and political bias doesn't seem to be a problem so far with him, in my opinion. And I really appreciate that. I wish both aisles had people like that because it's very common that their political biases get in the way of this topic specifically, and this has been happening forever on both sides. I think that that's a mistake, and I think that Burleson is doing everything he can to avoid that, and I really appreciate that from him. Also, because of something that he's been doing recently, and I want to show you guys. It's a tweet, and it's a very simple but revelatory tweet. This is what he says: "The cover up ends now. Congress has the power to bring this to light, and we intend to use it." And then the image that he used is this one. And obviously, those three topics kind of seem and feel in some ways that might be connected. And that's the scary part. That's why Craig and I had that conversation, because you have to think of this as an interwoven problem that sometimes will lead you to certain places that you didn't expect, very uncomfortable, and in some cases, even gross, disturbing places. But it seems to be sort of connected. I don't know if you guys remember that interview that Eric Weinstein did on the Diary of a CEO, I think it is, and where he discusses the Epstein problem and how Epstein was interested in edge science, and he had control of many of the greatest minds of the 20th century, Stephen Hawking, Krauss, and others. So it's inevitably linked. If Representative Burleson wants to tackle this, I would go first for UAPs. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think that what's going to happen is that Burleson spells it out for you in a different tweet. This retweet he made of my friend Asa Rocky, because Asa Rocky thinks the same way I do. He says, I think Eric genuinely wants the truth and isn't doing partisan positioning like some others. I appreciate that. This is the tweet that I think is a mistake, because I think UFOs should go first. I know that the main public interest is in the Epstein files. And he says Americans were promised justice. Instead, they got redacted reports and silence. I'm fighting to change that, and I'm starting with the Epstein files. But UFOs should go first, Eric, because I think that it is interconnected, and what you will find or get to know about the reality of those files may even spook the hell out of you. So, but that's just a hunch. I don't know. Eric Burlison is the one who seems with the most resolve, and I just wanted to ask a few questions. First of all, how much access do you have to President Donald Trump, who presumably could be the one who listens to this and tries to tackle the issue? Could it be that Representative Burleson is part of this effort of Trump trying to get access to these SAPs? Because if Eric has already been briefed about a lot of this, and it seems like he has, I would guess that President Trump has more access than him. So at least they know about these SAPs. Eric Burlison has already stated a couple of times that he knows they exist, these SAPs, whatever they are. And I think, yeah, it makes sense that he's trying to do this with President Donald Trump. So I saw that connection, and a more up to date version of this article from Lespresso. And I want to ask you, what do you think about this article? What do you think about what allegedly President Donald Trump is doing? Go check out Lespresso's credibility and credentials. It will surprise you. That surprised me, because they usually are very left center type of newspaper. They even did a few or many articles against Silvio Berlusconi, who is one of Italy's most prominent capitalists ever. And he was even the prime minister of the country a couple of times. And this journal was always fighting against the system that he created. So that surprised me. And I don't know, I grant this high level of credibility, this article. I do. And if you want to know like the full context of it and what Project Preserve Destiny really is, go to the talk between Craig and I, and that will lead you through more rabbit holes. And happy hunting. Let me know what you think. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's all you need to do in order to help us, and it is what helps us the most. So thank you. But if you want to support the channel in other ways, there's a few links down there. You can become a member, or you can support us through KGRA. I just have that interview with Craig Oliver out on every KGRA platform, on every platform, Apple, Amazon. You can go check it out there if you want. That's it for me today on this video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay curious and always thorough, inquisitive, like Craig Oliver. Always. Bye. Hi, Craig.